Have you ever judged someone in just a few seconds, only to discover later that they were the bravest person in the room? What if the quiet stranger everyone doubted was carrying a truth that could change everything? Heavy rain covered the city as people rushed through the streets, trying to escape the storm. Thunder echoed across the sky while dark clouds made the afternoon feel like night. Inside the city's largest courthouse, lawyers, police officers, and reporters filled the halls. Everyone believed today's hearing would be simple. The evidence looked clear. The accused man seemed guilty. The judge was ready to finish the case quickly. But no one knew that one unexpected witness was about to walk through those doors. She wasn't wearing an expensive suit. She wasn't surrounded by security guards or famous lawyers. She looked like someone who had just finished a long shift at the hospital. Her blue medical scrubs were marked with small stains from hours of emergency work, and a faded green jacket covered her arms. Many people stared at her without saying a word. Some quietly laughed, believing she had entered the wrong courtroom. If stories that reveal hidden heroes inspire you, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share. Every click helps us tell more unforgettable stories. Her name was Emily Carter. For more than 15 years, Emily had worked as an emergency trauma nurse. She had seen terrible accidents, deadly fires, and people fighting for their final breath. She had learned something important during those years. Real heroes rarely looked like heroes. That morning had already tested every bit of her strength. Long before sunrise, emergency alarms filled Harbor City Medical Center. A passenger bus had collided with a fuel truck outside the city. Within minutes, ambulance after ambulance arrived carrying injured passengers. Doctors barely had time to breathe. Emily had already completed her overnight shift and was preparing to leave when another emergency alert sounded. Someone asked quietly, "Can you stay another hour?" She looked toward the ambulance entrance. Another vehicle had just arrived. She smiled gently. "I'll stay until everyone is safe." For the next several hours she barely stopped moving. She treated broken bones. She controlled heavy bleeding. She comforted frightened children. She held the hands of elderly patients who believed they would never see their families again. Her own body begged for rest, but she ignored the pain. Because every second mattered. Near noon, doctors finally announced that the last critical patient had reached surgery safely. Only then did Emily realize she was already late. She quickly washed her hands, removed her gloves, and looked at the clock. She had less than 1 hour before she needed to appear in court. A younger nurse looked at her worriedly. "Emily, you should go home and change." Emily looked down at her stained scrubs. "I don't have time. You can't appear in court like this." "I don't have another choice." Inside her locker hung an old military-style field jacket. Its green color had faded with age. One shoulder carried an old burn mark. A small patch had been stitched above the sleeve years ago. Most people never noticed it. Emily quietly picked up the jacket and slipped it over her shoulders. The sleeves completely covered both of her arms. She closed the zipper. She picked up her bag. Without another word, she walked toward the parking lot. She had no idea that this ordinary jacket would soon become the center of an unbelievable courtroom confrontation. Across the city, another man waited inside a courtroom. His name was Daniel Brooks. 3 weeks earlier, Daniel had been called a violent criminal. Police reports claimed he had attacked 3 men in a narrow alley behind a restaurant. Photographs showed serious injuries. Witnesses had disappeared. Almost everyone believed the case was already solved. Only Daniel knew what had really happened. And today, one exhausted nurse carried the missing piece of the truth. Daniel Brooks sat quietly at the defense table, staring at the wooden floor instead of the people around him. He had once been known as a calm, disciplined man who always stepped forward to help others. Now the newspapers called him dangerous. Social media had already declared him guilty before the trial had even begun. The courtroom slowly filled with reporters, curious citizens, and lawyers carrying thick files. Some whispered while pointing toward Daniel. Others shook their heads, convinced they already knew the entire story. Daniel ignored every stare. He had learned during the last 3 weeks that public opinion could change faster than the weather. The only thing he cared about now was the truth. His attorney, Michael Hayes, walked over carrying another folder. "We're still missing one witness," Michael said quietly. Daniel looked up. Do you think she'll come? I honestly don't know. Daniel nodded without speaking. If she failed to appear, the defense would lose its strongest piece of evidence. The prosecutor would present only one version of the incident, and Daniel's future could disappear within a single afternoon. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, Emily parked her old sedan and hurried toward the entrance. Rain soaked the stone steps. People rushed past her carrying umbrellas. She held her hospital bag tightly while climbing toward the security checkpoint. A security officer noticed the stains on her scrubs. Busy day, he asked. Emily smiled politely. You could say that. He examined her identification badge before returning it. Second floor. Courtroom 9. Thank you. She walked away without another word. As Emily climbed the stairs, pain spread through her shoulders. She paused for only a second. Nobody around her noticed. Years ago she had learned never to complain about pain unless someone else's life depended on hearing it. She reached the hallway outside the courtroom. Through the closed doors she could already hear voices. Arguments. Objections. The trial had already begun. Inside, the prosecutor confidently addressed the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, the facts are simple. He pointed toward Daniel. The defendant violently attacked 3 unarmed citizens. Several jurors looked directly at Daniel. The victim suffered broken bones, permanent injuries, and emotional trauma. He paused dramatically. And the evidence will show that this attack was completely unnecessary. Michael stood. Objection. Sustained. The prosecutor nodded and continued more carefully. We will allow the evidence to speak for itself. Daniel remained completely still. He knew every sentence sounded convincing, because half the truth often sounded stronger than the whole truth. Outside, Emily placed one hand on the courtroom door. She took a deep breath. Everything depended on what happened next. Emily slowly opened the door. The room became silent. Nearly every head turned toward her. Reporters stopped writing. Jurors watched her with curiosity. Even the judge looked up from his papers. No one recognized the exhausted nurse standing quietly near the entrance. But within the next few minutes, everyone in that courtroom would remember her name. Emily quietly closed the courtroom door behind her. The sound of the heavy wooden door echoed across the silent room. Judge Richard Lawson adjusted his glasses before looking directly at her. You must be Miss Emily Carter. Yes, Your Honor. You are nearly 10 minutes late. I came directly from Harbor City Medical Center. The judge glanced at her stained blue scrubs. So I can see. A few people in the gallery exchanged amused smiles. One reporter quietly whispered, She looks like she walked in from an emergency room. Another replied, Maybe she got the courtroom address wrong. Emily ignored them completely. She had heard people judge appearances her entire life. Nothing about today surprised her. Judge Lawson continued studying her. This courtroom follows professional standards. I understand, Your Honor. Then why are you dressed like this? Emily answered calmly. There was a mass casualty emergency this morning. I stayed until every critical patient reached surgery. The judge remained silent. You couldn't change before arriving? My clean clothes were at home. The prosecutor folded his arms while watching the exchange. Several jurors looked at Emily with curiosity instead of criticism. Something about her calm voice made it difficult to believe she was being disrespectful. Judge Lawson noticed the old green jacket covering her arms. Unlike the clean courtroom suits surrounding him, the jacket looked worn by years of use. Its faded fabric carried tiny repairs along one sleeve. One shoulder showed a dark burn mark that had never been fully repaired. What is that jacket? The judge asked. Emily looked down briefly. It's mine. It appears unusual for a courtroom. It keeps me comfortable. The answer sounded simple, but it left everyone wondering. Defense attorney Michael Hayes stepped forward. Your Honor, Ms. Carter is our final witness. I understand, the judge replied, but appearances matter. Michael nodded respectfully. They do. Then perhaps your witness should remove the jacket before addressing the jury. The room became quiet. Emily remained still. She didn't argue. She didn't become angry. She simply looked at the judge. I would prefer to keep it on. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. Is there a legal reason? There is a personal reason. The judge leaned back. Personal reasons are rarely enough in a courtroom. Daniel watched the conversation without saying a word. Something about Emily's expression worried him. She wasn't nervous. She looked cautious, as if removing the jacket would reveal something she had spent years trying to hide. The judge spoke again. Miss Carter, this is a simple request. Emily answered politely. I understand. Then please remove your jacket before taking the witness stand. The entire courtroom waited. Emily slowly lowered her eyes. Her fingers gently touched the zipper. But she didn't move it. Instead, she took a slow breath. For the first time since entering the courthouse, a trace of emotion appeared on her face. Not fear, not anger. Something much deeper. Something connected to memories she had spent years trying to leave behind. Daniel immediately understood. Whatever she was hiding, it had nothing to do with shame. It had everything to do with pain. Emily stood silently. Every eye in the courtroom remained fixed on her hand resting on the zipper. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. Judge Lawson folded his hands. Miss Carter, he said calmly, the court is waiting. Emily slowly looked up. I understand, Your Honor. Then please comply. Before she could answer, Attorney Michael Hayes stepped forward. Your Honor, may I speak for just a moment? You may. My witness has requested a simple accommodation. Her testimony concerns medical evidence, not her appearance. Judge Lawson remained firm. The dignity of this court is also evidence of respect. Michael nodded politely. I understand. But forcing a witness to reveal something unrelated to this case serves no legal purpose. The prosecutor immediately stood. The Commonwealth has no objection to the witness removing the jacket. Several jurors quietly exchanged glances. The discussion was no longer about clothing. Everyone sensed there was something much deeper hidden beneath that faded jacket. Daniel watched Emily carefully. He knew her better than anyone else inside that room. Months earlier they had met at a veterans community health program where Emily volunteered every weekend. She never spoke much about herself. She listened more than she talked. Whenever someone struggled with painful memories, she never interrupted. She simply stayed beside them until the silence became easier to carry. Daniel remembered asking her one question during their first meeting. Why do you spend your weekends here? Emily had smiled gently. Because healing doesn't end when people leave the hospital. That answer had stayed with him ever since. Now he feared the courtroom was about to uncover the painful history she had worked so hard to protect. Judge Lawson spoke again. Miss Carter, I will ask one final time. Emily took a slow breath. I mean no disrespect. I appreciate that. But I respectfully ask permission to keep the jacket on. The judge sighed. This court cannot grant special treatment without reason. Emily lowered her eyes again. I cannot explain the reason. The room became silent once more. One juror, an elderly woman seated near the front, studied Emily carefully. She noticed something others had missed. Emily wasn't trembling. She wasn't refusing because of pride. She was protecting something. Something deeply personal. Judge Lawson finally leaned forward. If there is no explanation, I must insist. Michael quietly whispered to Emily. You don't have to do this. Daniel heard those words from across the courtroom. He slowly stood. Your Honor. The judge looked toward him. You will remain seated. Daniel spoke respectfully. If my witness feels uncomfortable, I ask the court to excuse her testimony. Michael immediately looked at him. Daniel. He shook his head. The case isn't worth hurting someone who came here to help me. Emily turned toward him. For the first time that day, a faint smile appeared on her face. You once told me something, she said softly. Daniel looked confused. When? The day you helped an injured stranger after your counseling session. He remembered. Emily continued. You said good people don't walk away when the truth needs them. Daniel lowered his eyes. I remember. So do I. Emily slowly placed her hospital bag on a nearby chair. She carefully removed a sealed envelope. Michael immediately recognized it. Inside were official hospital records connected to the case, the missing medical evidence, the documents everyone had been searching for. The prosecutor noticed them too. His confident expression suddenly changed. Judge Lawson looked at the envelope. "What is that?" Emily answered calmly. "The reason I came directly from the hospital." The courtroom became completely silent. No one spoke. No one moved. Because everyone realized the trial they believed was nearly over was only just beginning. The courtroom remained silent as Emily placed the sealed hospital envelope on the witness stand. Judge Lawson looked at it for several seconds before speaking. "Is this evidence related to today's case?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Has it been submitted to the court?" "My attorney received it this morning." Michael Hayes stepped forward and carefully accepted the envelope. It contains certified medical records, emergency treatment notes, and chain of custody documentation from Harbor City Medical Center. The prosecutor frowned. "My office has never seen those documents." Michael looked directly at him. "Neither had we. Until this morning." A quiet murmur spread through the gallery. The judge gently tapped his gavel. "Order." Everyone immediately fell silent. "This court will examine the documents before any testimony continues." Michael handed the envelope to the court clerk. The clerk carefully checked the hospital seal before placing it on the judge's desk. No one could take their eyes off it. A few sheets of paper suddenly seemed more important than everything said during the past 3 weeks. Judge Lawson slowly opened the envelope. Inside were several medical reports, photographs, and signed hospital forms. He read quietly for nearly a minute. The courtroom was so silent that even the sound of turning pages seemed loud. Finally, he looked toward the prosecutor. "Mr. Collins." "Yes, Your Honor." "Did your office receive these medical records before trial?" "No, sir." Michael immediately responded. "Neither did the defense." The judge's expression became serious. "Granted." The clerk carried copies to both legal teams. Daniel watched from the defense table. He had never seen Emily look nervous. Even now she remained calm. She wasn't trying to win an argument. She simply wanted the complete truth to be heard. While the attorneys reviewed the reports, one juror quietly observed Emily. The elderly woman noticed the hospital identification badge, still clipped to her scrubs. It showed today's date. Emily had truly come straight from work. She hadn't changed clothes. She hadn't gone home. She had walked into court exactly as she had left the emergency room. The juror slowly nodded to herself. Whatever this witness had to say, she had earned the right to be heard. Across the room, Daniel noticed Emily gently rubbing her left wrist. It was a small movement. Most people missed it. But Daniel remembered seeing her do the same thing months earlier after lifting heavy medical equipment during a volunteer event. She never complained. She simply continued helping others. Michael finally looked up from the medical file. "Your Honor." He paused. "This report references physical evidence collected during emergency treatment." The prosecutor immediately looked at the same page. His eyes widened. "I don't have this inventory record." Michael answered calmly. "Neither did we." Judge Lawson leaned forward. "What exactly is missing?" Michael placed one page on the evidence screen. "This hospital inventory lists an item recovered from one of the patients immediately after admission." The entire courtroom watched the screen. No one spoke. Even the reporters stopped writing. They knew the next sentence could change the direction of the entire trial. Michael closed the file for a moment and looked toward Emily. "Miss Carter." She nodded. "I'm ready." The judge looked toward the witness stand. "You may begin your testimony." Emily stood. She adjusted the microphone. Then she looked directly at the 12 jurors. For the first time since entering the courtroom, she was finally ready to tell them exactly what she had seen. Emily stood before the jury with the same calm expression she had carried into the courtroom. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to sound dramatic. She simply wanted every word she spoke to be honest. Judge Lawson nodded. "You may proceed." Michael Hayes walked a few steps closer. "Miss Carter, please tell the jury your occupation." I am a senior trauma nurse at Harbor City Medical Center. How many years have you worked in emergency medicine? Almost 16 years. Have you treated victims of violent assaults? Yes. Have you documented evidence while treating emergency patients? Many times. Michael smiled slightly. Why is documentation so important? Emily answered without hesitation. Because memories can change. Medical records cannot. Several jurors wrote those words in their notebooks. The prosecutor quietly watched from his table. He knew this witness was different. She wasn't speaking like someone trying to help a friend. She sounded like someone explaining facts. Michael displayed the first hospital document on the courtroom screen. Do you recognize this report? Yes. When was it prepared? During emergency treatment on the night of the incident. Who prepared it? I did. Was anyone from the police department present when you completed it? No. So these notes were written before investigators interviewed you? Yes. Michael looked toward the jury. Why does that matter? Emily answered calmly. It means the report was created before anyone discussed legal arguments with me. The courtroom remained quiet. Every juror understood the importance of that answer. The document had been written while doctors were trying to save lives, not while lawyers were preparing a trial. Michael turned another page. What is the first responsibility of a trauma nurse when a seriously injured patient arrives? Keeping the patient alive. What comes second? Recording everything we observe. And why? So nothing important is forgotten. Judge Lawson nodded slightly. The answer sounded simple, but everyone in the room knew that forgotten details could decide an entire case. Michael displayed another page. Miss Carter, does this report describe injuries only? No. What else does it include? Personal property recovered during treatment. Is documenting personal property a normal hospital procedure? Yes. When clothing is removed during emergency care, every valuable or unusual item is listed. Michael pointed toward a highlighted section. Did you personally complete this section? I did. The prosecutor carefully reviewed his own copy. His expression became more serious. He realized every answer Emily gave matched the written records exactly. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't exaggerating. She was simply reading facts she had personally recorded. Michael continued. When you completed these records, did you know Daniel Brooks personally? Emily looked toward Daniel. No. Had you ever met him before that night? No. So you had no personal reason to favor him? None. Daniel quietly lowered his head. He had expected the evidence to help. He hadn't expected the truth to sound so powerful. Michael picked up the final document. Miss Carter. Yes. Did you alter these records after writing them? No. Has anyone ever asked you to change them? Emily paused. The courtroom became completely still. She slowly looked toward the judge, then toward the jury. Finally she answered. Someone asked questions about one part of my report. Michael frowned. What kind of questions? They wanted to know whether one particular item could be removed from the evidence inventory. A wave of whispers spread through the courtroom. Judge Lawson immediately raised his gavel. Order. The room fell silent again. Michael spoke carefully. Did you agree to remove it? Emily met his eyes. No. Why not? Because hospital records belong to the truth. The prosecutor looked down at his file. For the first time that day, he wasn't thinking about winning the case. He was thinking about what might have happened before the trial had even begun. The courtroom remained silent after Emily's last answer. Judge Lawson looked over the top of his glasses. Miss Carter, when you say someone questioned your report, were you instructed to change it? Emily shook her head. No, Your Honor. Then explain exactly what happened. I received a phone call from a person asking whether one item listed in the hospital inventory could be treated as ordinary personal property instead of possible evidence. Michael Hayes stepped forward. Did the caller identify himself? He introduced himself as someone representing a property inquiry. Did he ask you to rewrite your report? No. What did he ask? He wanted to know if the inventory entry could be removed from the evidence section. And what was your response? I told him hospital records cannot be changed unless the original entry was incorrect. Was your original entry incorrect? No. The jury carefully watched Emily. She spoke without emotion. Every answer was short. Every answer was clear. It sounded less like an argument and more like a medical report. Michael walked toward the evidence screen. Miss Carter, why are hospital records treated so seriously? Emily answered immediately. Because they are created while medical staff are focused on saving lives, not preparing legal cases. So accuracy is essential? Yes. What happens if something important is left out? It can change how people understand what happened. Several jurors nodded. One of them quietly underlined a sentence in his notebook. Across the room, the prosecutor remained silent. He wasn't objecting anymore. Instead, he was comparing Emily's testimony with the documents in front of him. Everything matched. Dates, times, signatures, treatment notes. Nothing appeared inconsistent. Michael picked up another page. Miss Carter, after completing your report, did you personally seal the hospital evidence package? Yes. Did anyone open it while it remained under hospital control? No. Was the seal intact when you last saw it? Yes. Michael looked toward the judge. So the chain of custody remained complete? According to the hospital records, yes. Judge Lawson wrote several notes before looking toward the prosecutor. Mr. Collins simply nodded. He had no objection. Michael slowly approached the witness stand again. Miss Carter. Yes. Did you come to court today because someone asked you to help Daniel Brooks personally? Emily looked briefly toward Daniel before answering. No. Then why did you come? Because I was subpoenaed to tell the truth about what I documented. If the records had supported the prosecution instead, would your testimony be different? No. What would change? Only the facts. The courtroom became completely quiet. That answer carried unexpected weight. Even Daniel looked surprised. Emily wasn't defending him. She was defending the evidence. Judge Lawson leaned back in his chair. For the first time that afternoon, he no longer saw an exhausted nurse in stained scrubs. He saw a professional witness whose loyalty was not to either side, but to the truth itself. Michael smiled politely. No further questions at this time. Judge Lawson turned toward the prosecution table. Mr. Collins. The prosecutor slowly stood. He gathered his notes. He looked once at Emily, then at the jury. Finally, he walked toward the witness stand. Miss Carter. Emily met his eyes calmly. Good afternoon. He gave a small nod. Good afternoon. The entire courtroom sensed what was coming next. The cross-examination was about to begin, and everyone knew. This would be the most important conversation of the trial so far. The courtroom was so quiet that even the sound of the prosecutor's footsteps echoed across the room. Mr. Collins stopped a few feet from the witness stand. He placed a thin notebook on the desk and looked directly at Emily. Miss Carter, thank you for your patience. Emily nodded politely. You're welcome. I only have a few questions. Judge Lawson looked toward the jury. You may proceed. Collins folded his hands. You've testified that you've worked as a trauma nurse for nearly 16 years. Yes. And during those years you've treated hundreds of emergency patients. Yes. So it would be fair to say you've seen many confusing situations. I have. And not every first impression turns out to be correct. Emily answered calmly. That is true. The prosecutor slowly walked across the courtroom. So you would agree that appearances can be misleading. They often are. Several jurors quietly exchanged glances. The answer supported neither side. It simply sounded honest. Collins stopped beside the evidence screen. Miss Carter, let's talk about the night of the incident. Emily nodded. You treated one of the injured men first, correct? Yes. What condition was he in? He was conscious but in severe pain. Was he able to answer questions? Only briefly. Was he frightened? Yes. The prosecutor looked toward the jury. So people suffering serious injuries may not always remember events clearly. Emily answered carefully. Pain can affect memory. But medical records cannot tell us everything that happened before an injury. No. They only describe what medical staff observed after the patient arrived. Correct. Collins smiled slightly. Thank you. The jury listened closely. His questions were reasonable. He wasn't attacking Emily. He was trying to limit how much weight the medical records carried. Michael Hayes quietly took notes, waiting for the right moment. The prosecutor opened another folder. Miss Carter, did you personally witness the fight? No. So you cannot tell this jury exactly how it began? No. You cannot say who threw the first punch? No. You cannot identify every person involved? No. Collins nodded. So your testimony today is limited to your medical observations? Yes. A few members of the audience whispered. The prosecutor appeared confident again. He believed he had narrowed the witness's importance. But Emily remained completely calm. She wasn't trying to speak beyond her knowledge. She answered only what she personally knew. Judge Lawson noticed the difference. Many witnesses tried to sound certain. Emily never guessed. She simply answered the question before her. That made her testimony more believable. Collins picked up one final document. Miss Carter. Yes. Earlier you mentioned an inventory record. I did. That inventory listed an unusual item recovered during emergency treatment. Yes. Without telling the jury what that item is just yet. Emily waited. Can you confirm that you personally recorded it? Yes. And no one instructed you to add it? No. No one asked you to invent it? No. You simply documented what you found. Exactly. The prosecutor paused. For a brief moment, he looked down at the page in his hands. Then he slowly raised his eyes toward the witness. His voice became quieter. Miss Carter. Yes. The next question may change this entire trial. Every person in the courtroom leaned forward. Even the reporters stopped typing. The prosecutor took a slow breath. Please tell the jury. What was the item you documented that night? The room fell completely silent. Emily looked toward the judge. Then at the jury. She gently reached for the evidence file. The answer everyone had been waiting for was finally about to be revealed. Emily carefully opened the evidence folder. The courtroom became so quiet that no one dared to whisper. She removed a clear evidence pouch and held it where everyone could see. Inside was a small silver keychain with an engraved medical alert tag. Judge Lawson leaned forward. Miss Carter, please explain. Emily nodded. This item was found inside the jacket pocket of one of the injured men when he arrived at the emergency department. Michael Hayes remained silent. Even the prosecutor waited. Emily continued. The tag contains emergency medical information. She handed the pouch to the court clerk, who placed it on the evidence monitor. The large screen displayed the engraved words. Blood type, O-negative severe allergy. Penicillin beneath that was another line. Emergency contact. Daniel Brooks. A wave of surprise spread across the courtroom. The jurors looked toward Daniel. The prosecutor frowned. Mr. Brooks was listed as the emergency contact? Emily answered. Yes. Collins quickly stepped forward. Could someone else have added his name later? Emily shook her head. No. The engraving showed years of wear. It was not recently made. Michael finally spoke. Your Honor, permission to present additional evidence. Granted. Michael walked to the evidence table and placed several photographs beside the medical records. These photographs were taken by hospital staff immediately after admission. The images appeared on the courtroom screen. They showed the victim's belongings exactly as they had been documented. The keychain was clearly visible. The timestamp matched the emergency admission records. Judge Lawson studied each photograph carefully. The prosecutor looked down at his own copies. Everything matched. Dates, times, inventory numbers. Nothing had been altered. Michael turned toward. He paused. But why would an innocent victim carry Daniel Brooks as his emergency contact? Silence. No one answered. Michael continued. The answer is simple. They were not strangers. They knew each other. And that means the original story presented to investigators was incomplete. The prosecutor slowly stood. Your Honor. He hesitated. After reviewing the newly admitted evidence, the Commonwealth requests a short recess. Judge Lawson nodded. Granted. 20 minutes later, everyone returned. The atmosphere had completely changed. The prosecutor no longer looked confident. He looked concerned. He stood once more. Your Honor, after reviewing the medical records, witness testimony, and newly admitted evidence, the prosecution cannot proceed under the original theory of this case. A loud gasp filled the courtroom. Judge Lawson raised his gavel. Order. The room fell silent again. The prosecutor continued. We are requesting that the current charges against Daniel Brooks be dismissed without prejudice while investigators conduct a complete review. Daniel closed his eyes. For the first time in weeks, he could finally breathe. Michael placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You never stopped believing. Daniel smiled faintly. I almost did. Judge Lawson looked toward Emily. Miss Carter. Yes, Your Honor. The court thanks you for your professionalism. You came here after saving lives all morning. You answered every question honestly. And because you protected accurate medical records, this court was able to hear the complete truth. Emily lowered her head respectfully. I was simply doing my job. The judge smiled. Sometimes doing your job changes someone's life. Several jurors quietly applauded before realizing they were still inside a courtroom. Even the judge couldn't hide a small smile. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Daniel. He politely declined every interview. Instead, he walked toward Emily. She was preparing to leave. Emily. She turned around. Yes. I don't know how to thank you. Emily smiled gently. You don't have to. You told me once that good people shouldn't walk away when the truth needs them. Daniel laughed softly. I guess today you reminded me of my own words. Emily looked toward the evening sky. The truth doesn't always arrive first. But if people protect it, it usually arrives in time. Daniel extended his hand. She shook it. No cameras captured that moment. No reporters asked questions. It was simply one person thanking another. Sometimes the greatest victories happen quietly. Not with applause. Not with headlines. But with the knowledge that honesty, courage, and compassion can still overcome fear. And as Emily walked toward the parking lot, wearing the same worn green jacket she had entered with that morning, no one laughed at her anymore. Now they understood something they had missed at first glance. Real heroes rarely announce themselves. They simply show up, tell the truth, and quietly change lives forever.